today. Today we're starting GreenStory's 3-day webinar, and today's session will be a fireside chat with Lca pioneer Dr. Muthu. So, to kick things off, I'll give a brief introduction to GreenStory, our guest Dr. Muthu, and myself, and then we will hear from Dr. Muthu himself. So, to introduce GreenStory firstly, GreenStory was set up 5 years ago with the goal of getting every consumer to ask, what's my impact? As a company, we work with brands from startups to global giants to measure the impact of their supply chains and visualize it for their customers. Whether this be to show their environmental savings to their customers or to help them understand their impact so they can offset their carbon emissions. So, our guest today on this webinar is the wonderful Dr. Muthu. Dr. Muthu is the head of sustainability at SGT, the textile quality specialist within the Worm Safety Alliance, the first global alliance and quality management specialist. With a PhD in textile sustainability, Dr. Muthu is a textile technologist and has published over 102 scientific books and 100 research papers. He has pardon? Oh, I thought you said something. You agreed to this, Dr. Muthu. Perfect. He has over 12 years of experience in environmental and chemical sustainability and has supported hundreds of factories and international leading brands' supply chain. He's one of Higg Index's initial contributors and today's one of the few Sustainable Apparel Coalition approved FEM trainers and verifiers in the world. And just so you know who I am as well, I'm the lead researcher and LCA analyst at GreenStory. I have my master's in developmental economics with a focus on sustainability, as well as being trained in life cycle assessments software from Sfera, and have been applying this at GreenStory for the past several years. So let's jump right into our questions, into this fireside chat with Dr. Muthu. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat box, and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end of our webinar. All right, so let's start briefly with a quite general question. So, Dr. Muthu, what is an LCA and why is it important?
Okay, before I begin, I would like to welcome all the attendees for this great session. Very interesting topic which we are going to speak for an hour now. Always it's a pleasure to talk about LCA and again impact assessments. A wonderful arrangement made by GreenStory team. I'm so happy and excited to be with all of you. Before I begin, I would like to record my sincere thanks to the entire team of GreenStory, Akhil, Marshall, Anita, and the rest of the team for having me for this wonderful occasion. And I'm so happy to talk to all of you on this great topic. And if you have any questions, please do let us know. We will have a Q&A session at the end, or you can also send your questions by chat. So just to begin with the first question, what is LCA, right? And then you also wanted me to talk about why it's important, right, Anita?
Exactly. Perfect. Right. Yes.
So, as you all know, LCA stands for Life Cycle Assessment. So that's a tool, again, scientific tool, to quantify the environmental impacts of a product or process, or even for a service, right? Let's talk about product or process throughout its entire life cycle. So when I say life cycle, that encompasses all the phases from cradle to grave, or cradle to cradle, or cradle to gate. So in general, if you talk about cradle to grave, it covers raw material acquisition, production and assembly, transportation, to product use, reuse, recycle, and end of life or disposal. It's an objective, science-based method that can handle a wide range of environmental problems. Its use has been expanded to cover social well-being too, but I'm not getting into it here. So today we are going to focus upon environmental life cycle assessment.
Exactly. Perfect. And can you tell us a little bit about why it's important?
Okay. Accounting for all the costs of a good or a service is quite necessary to determine if a product or service will be profitable and competitive, right? Similarly, accounting for energy, emissions along the life cycle of a good or service, it's also necessary to determine if producing a product is environmentally sustainable for us and also for the future generations. That's the key. More recently, accounting for energy and emissions from a life cycle perspective has gained a lot of attention and rapidly driven by the growing concern of climate change, greenhouse gases, and so many other environmental hazards. For example, human toxicity, eutrophication, and so on have spurred all companies and even governments to try and mitigate environmental impacts associated with all their products or services, everything right from water bottles, clothes to fuels. How do we do that? The first step in doing that is to measure the impacts, rather quantify the impacts or pollution that these goods or services create on the ecosystem and resources. And the tool, what we talk about, Lca, helps in quantifying the impacts or rather pollution these products or services impose on our planet. Next.
Exactly.
Lca is very much important for researchers, policymakers, and consumers alike, as it helps each stakeholder comprehend the true impacts of any given product or service. For example, let's take an example. A company designs and develops an amazing product. Let's say a carbon neutral t-shirt, right? That's quite interesting to talk about. That can reduce the energy consumption and emissions, for example. But what if the product needs more resources in terms of its wash and laundry? For example, in the use stage, or does not biodegrade or create a lot of issues in disposing than the conventional products or rivals already available. In such a situation, the overall objective which we had before in developing this product to reduce the cost, energy, and emissions is completely undermined. This is not a sustainable product at all. So that's why I always term, with my clients, with my students, with my fellow colleagues, peers, with everyone, whoever is involved in this space, that if you want to claim a product as sustainable, the only way to do with this is that to go for a Lca, because a product has to be sustainable in all the life cycle phases. So here comes the importance of Lca. But having said that, in such a situation, right, the overall objective generally to reduce cost, energy, and to have a peaceful completion of its life cycle. So these are the objectives that has to be evaluated across the entire life cycle phases, not only in one phase, but it has to be across the entire life cycle phases.
Right.
So here comes the importance of Lca. Here, Lca helps to compare products, identify hotspots in the said t-shirt's life cycle, for example, and focus on designers, engineers, and management's attention on main improvement opportunities to, let's say, offset energy and emission savings uptime while manufacturing the taken example, for example, carbon neutral t-shirt. It helps stakeholders find out the difference between an environmentally sustainable product and a less sustainable alternative. Moreover, Lca is closely connected to carbon footprinting in line with extended producer responsibility, supply chain management strategies, and it is very much required in the EU for new products. Again, if anyone wants to claim, as I mentioned before, a product as green, the only way, I underline this, the only way to justify the claims in terms of scientific consensus is to perform a Lca. Otherwise, it will be treated as greenwashing. And as everyone knows, in today's industrial context, one can see umpteen numbers of greenwashing. And the only way to get rid of greenwashing from the sector is to have a robust and scientifically done Lca in place.
Right.
Did I answer your question, Anita?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you. And exactly as you say, this is so important, especially because greenwashing, we see this happening all over in all different industries. And what it leads to is actually, it makes people lose trust in green products and in new innovative products. So how can we tell actually what is sustainable and what is not? Because anyone can make claims, but the only way, as you say, to really see what is sustainable is to show the hard facts and to show it through an LCA and through the results of that. Yeah.
Absolutely, because we are seeing a lot of products. I just want to record that I'm so happy that the industry has gained its momentum, and the industry is making umpteen number of efforts to make it sustainable in terms of new fibers, new processes, and new techniques, methodologies, and so on. I'm so happy. I'm so passionate about this sector. So that's the reason I've been in this space for really quite some time, and I gained my doctorate in the same subject. So I'm so happy to note all these contributions to the industry. But at the same time, I'm equally concerned that the claims what we are seeing today, they are not really backed up with properly justified data, which eventually has to come out from a robust LCA study.
Yep, exactly. All right, so for anyone out there kind of wanting to know some more, so how are LCAs typically performed, and what information is needed to perform them?
Okay, LCAs are typically performed in 4 stages. This is again as per ISO 14040/44. So we have these 4 phases, starting from goal and scope definition, life cycle inventory, life cycle impact assessment, life cycle interpretation. So there are international standards, as I told you before, to conduct LCA, like ISO 14040/44. This was developed in 2006. All LCAs must have a functional unit, and this is the first and foremost requirement of a LCA. Functional unit is how the LCA or environmental impacts are measured, and it provides a reference to which the inputs and outputs are related, because end of the day, LCA is an input-output model. For example, a manufacturer will be interested in finding out the impacts of a denim manufacturing, let's say 1 kilogram of denim manufacturing as a single unit, whereas a consumer might be interested in understanding the impacts of the same denim in terms of laundry and disposal, because he is bothered about his own boundaries, and manufacturer, needless to say, he is bothered about his own boundaries. But the results would be obviously different. So it's really important to define a functional unit based on the goal of the study and its intended audiences. Because if a manufacturer is intended to find out what are the impacts in the manufacturing phase, so the goal, scope, and the functional unit has to be aligned in terms of his requirements. Similarly, for a consumer phase, so that has to be aligned in terms of meeting his or her expectations. So this is the very first step. The next step is to define the scope, system boundaries, like cradle to grave or cradle to cradle or cradle to industry gate. There are many variants, among others. So there are many variants. One has to consider which variant we are going with. Is it cradle to grave, cradle to cradle gate, or gate to gate? There are even gate to wheel. There are umpteen number of variants. So first step is to find out that. And the next step is LCI, which is life cycle inventory. What we do here we try to collect the material and the energy used, we call it as inventory data, within the scope or quantified in relation to the function unit defined. For example, let's talk about 1 kilogram of denim fabric. So how much energy is used, how much water is required, and so on. So we take into account of all the resources like energy, water, chemicals, auxiliaries, and so on in relation to this function unit, what we have defined for this scope. Inventory for upstream data, for example, inventory for producing 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, that is available in credible databases. The inventory data collected are converted to meaningful impacts in the impacts assessment step. That's the third step. So we have many methods to calculate this. Characterizing and normalizing the impacts is carried out using credible lifecycle assessment softwares such as SIMAPRO and GOBI, which are available. The results are used to draw conclusions and, very importantly, derive recommendations. What sort of recommendations? Again, if it is a process LCA, the recommendations are going to be different in terms of hotspots. Similarly, for product level, the recommendations are again going to be following this approach of product lifecycle approach to find out where are the hotspots, and very importantly, how to alleviate these impacts, which are all found in terms of hotspots in the LCA study, what we have performed. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. And so let's say that there is a brand or a person that wants to do this. Is there kind of a minimum requirement of some information that they would need to perform an LCA? Do they have to get all of, we're talking about the inventory. Do they have to get all of their data from suppliers, or can they get, some secondary data? What is kind of your opinion on that?
Right, Anita. I think it's a very interesting question what you have raised. See, this really depends on, again, many factors. So what scope we are talking about? If it is cradle to gate or cradle to grave. Why I'm saying this is that, see, generally when I did my PhD in 2008, the science of LCA or the space of LCA has not been developed so far. What you are seeing today. So what I did in 2008, that time it was not really developed. So generally we assume a t-shirt is used for 30 times, 40 times. That was a crazy thing. But today LCS have really been developed to a very great extent, where we take into account of real functional use, and we take into account of functional properties, eco-functional properties. That's what I did my PhD too. So why I'm saying is that it all depends on the scope what we are talking about. Talking about, again, the data requirements. Again, what is the requirement of a manufacturer or brand in terms of LCA? There lies a world of differences. For example, if one wants to have an internal reference, I do work with a lot of people. So someone comes and tell me, Dr. Kannan, I want to do LCA. So what's the purpose it is going to serve for you? This is my first question. So if they say that, no, I just want to find out what are my alternatives. So just to give you an example, I did work with a brand just recently. They told me very clearly their designers want to work with me. You know what? So they have a list of adhesives for their footwear products. So they want to find out which adhesive is best in terms of least human toxicity. So this is internal reference. So we don't have to go to a greater extent of collecting all the data from scratch. But of course, it's really better to do that. But we need to see the dire need. Do we have to go for it? So, and what is the purpose it is going to serve? If it is going to be for internal reference, then secondary data would suffice. So, why I'm saying this is that many people are really scared of, LCA demands a lot of data. I am really going to be on a difficult situation to provide a lot of data. It is not like that. So there are a lot of circumstances we can do with secondary data. But if you want to go for a public disclosure, you have to have primary data. So we need to get the actual data from on site, and that has to be verified. I don't know how many people are doing it today, but every number has to be verified, and then only it has to be plugged into the model before we model it. Okay, again, to answer your question in a crisp way, this all depends on what is the disclosure mode. Are we going to go for a public disclosure, or it's going to be serve as an internal reference, or just to have something? And what is your feasibility? Again, today industry is talking about transparency and traceability. Many people, many people feel that they may not be able to get the right data from the suppliers. So there are a lot of issues. So in that case, again, LCA, can be flexible depending on the factors what I told you. If you want for internal reference, but again, if you want to go for public disclosure, there are no shortcuts. You have to go for the real data, which is primary from the entire supply chain.
Yeah, wonderful. And even for your own disclosure, definitely the more data you can get, the better, right?
Absolutely. And then the more data, why, let's talk maybe a couple of minutes to talk about it. Why this is required? See, in the secondary data, it is not your actual data. We bring closeness to the actuality. Closeness to the actuality and the actual. That's a huge differences. But as LCA practitioners, you are LCA practitioner as well. We try to match to the maximum possible extent, in terms of replicating the actual scenarios. But again, that could be a difference. So that's what I'm saying. For secondary purposes or for your internal reference, secondary data would suffice. But if you want to go for your stakeholders, I've done a lot of LCA studies which have really changed the sourcing decisions of a lot of brands. So in that case, we can't go for secondary data. We have to go for primary data, which is eventually coming out from the supply chain.
Perfect. All right. great for everyone to know. All right, and do you think that LCAs are standardized at this point, or are there still variances between them?
Again, very good question. So I feel that maybe you should give me 2 hours to talk about this, but understanding the time limitation, let me try to answer as short and sweet as possible. See, if you talk about LCA methods, LCA methodologies, yes, they are standardized. Again, I'm talking about, with my own example. When I did my PhD, 2008, I started writing my proposal in 2007. That time we had only 2 LCA studies done. So that time you'll be surprised now, how we collect inventory, emissions to air, that's all. Emissions to water. We don't go to the very detailed level what we have today. And then, emissions to soil. This is how we collected the outputs. Inventory similar, very simple. So from that, with me, there are a lot of people who have toiled themselves to develop what we have today. So today, you see, we have credible databases. There are a lot of studies, happened in the sector. So the science of LCA has really, not science, the space of LCA has been developed a lot, and the science of LCA has really grown. So, people have a lot of insights. We have many methods, many characterization models, midpoint, endpoint indicators. Those periods, we don't have all that. And again, in 2008 to 13, when, after my PhD, after I joined my first job post-PhD, we did carbon footprint using LCA standard, like 14040. But you see today, since 2013, we have 14067. That's a standard which has been earmarked to do only carbon footprint, product carbon footprint, again, carbon footprint label. So, the methods have really grown. The methodology has been really standardized. But talking about variances, I would like to talk about the other side. What I want to tell you is that not all LCAs conducted by different practitioners are comparable, despite having the same functional unit, because of the underlying assumptions the LCA analyst has made. Similarly, like, in a typical denim example, what we talked about, assumptions like lifetime of a product, number of washes in lifetime, materials used, electricity mix of the manufacturing location, these all could change the results completely. They can turn the results upside down, and making the comparison of separate results completely difficult. So, but what I want to tell you is that there is no right answer, but can definitely identify hotspots and certainly get good recommendations. This might not sound so appealing or satisfactory, but that's how it works. Because, as I told you before, LCA depends on the data availability, quality, reliability, and very importantly, the assumptions made by the LCA practitioner. Therefore, it's highly important to document the data robustness and justify the assumptions made very transparently in any LCA report. I underline this because why I'm saying this, why I'm stressing this is that I keep seeing a lot of LCA reports where I couldn't find, one cannot find all these aspects what I'm talking about. If this is the case, then it will be very difficult. Equally important is to document how the results will change when assumptions change, because one has to really understand that these are all mathematical models. So each model has its own hypothesis, and there are a lot of equations, there are a lot of calculations, there are a lot of assumptions behind every single step. So that has to be really, really understood. So sensitivity study, it's really important. That can really help whether the change in any input data, like assumptions or data unavailability, affects the final LCA results. I mean, impacts, because we are talking about impacts of impact assessments, and by how much. That is very, very important. Similarly, one can also go for doing uncertainty analysis with Monte Carlo simulation, because there are a lot of uncertainties in the LCA study itself, in terms of the inventory data, in terms of the databases what we take, in terms of secondary data, in terms of many aspects, a model per se. So one has to record and document everything in a very clear and transparent manner, thereby the readers, the stakeholders have no ambiguities when comprehending the LCA report.
Right. I think I've seen so many studies out there that you look at and you don't find everything transparent. And it's quite difficult, as you're saying, how it's so difficult to compare them, because you need to understand the underlying assumptions, because at the end of the day, it is still a study. It is a hypothesis. You are still making assumptions that you have to base the study off of. And if a different LCA practitioner cannot see that, then you cannot compare things at all.
Yeah. Right, Adita, absolutely. I think we are talking about a very finite point here. Again, let's take 1 or 2 minutes to talk about this. See, if for example, if I am doing a study, why we should talk about others? Let's say you or I, okay, to be on safer side, so we can talk about citing examples with us.
Yeah.
So if I do a study and if I don't document my underlying assumptions, my underlying, let's say, I don't know, I didn't record how did I model the electricity. See, electricity is really built on geographical location. So I don't know, how many people go to that level of detail. Like generally when I do, or anyone who does it properly, they have to record all that in, like I used to go to the level of packaging of packaging, not only packaging of packaging, that we include the impacts. So we want to find out. So that if you look at this, the significance is very, very low, but still we want to record. So that is the level of detail I always go. I wish everyone else can go to that level. So for example, if I don't record all that, let's assume something. Okay, so someone is grabbing my report and they say, oh, Dr. Muthu has done this study, and they find out that, okay, I have done for an organic t-shirt, but I have not really stated any of my assumptions in the geographical base, in the temporal coverage, or in the function unit, or in the scope, boundaries, nothing. I just talk about this, and this is how the studies are published today. And then what X or Y will do? Oh, someone has done it. So they simply copy paste for themselves. And here comes the problem. Today you see, in LinkedIn or any social media or in any marketing media, today we are seeing a lot of anomalies. Everyone talks about X amount of water is required for this. So if you ask them, how did you get this? You know what they will say? They will simply send you a web link. From this we got. And when you look at it, that study is talking about X and they're talking about Y. Completely not matching. So this is the problem today the industry is facing. And many people do not have an idea of what that study was. Again, I just want to record this one through this webinar. LCA is not intended for apple to apple. So if that is a study, you can't completely take that for your circumstance. There are a lot of circumstantial factors, a lot of other factors which come into play. So you need to be really clear of a report in its entirety in terms of whatever we said, goal and scope, inventory, impacts, and assumptions, uncertainty, sensitivity. So you need to decipher on a lot of things before you conclude a particular result to your study, or if you want to make use of that result to your product or to your case. So please be aware of all this before you take anything from the internet.
Yes, fantastic point. Definitely noteworthy for all of our audience out there. If you are looking for those stats, I know they seem really great to use in whatever research or as a brand, but definitely, as Dr. Muthu was saying, please note that. Please look into the study before that is being used. Perfect. All right. Well, I guess then we can jump right into what do you think some of the challenges are? And I guess we've already been talking a little bit about that, but maybe we can go into a bit more detail of, the challenges that you face when conducting an LCA.
Okay. Again, data availability and the disclosure. We talked about it already. So this is the main challenge. Within goal and scope definition, allocation of materials and resources between byproducts or sometimes between different end users. Within the inventory stage, as already mentioned, data availability, challenges related to using lab scale data, identification of substitute product when we apply system expansion as it increases the complexity of the models and the data needs. Again, avoiding burden shifting accidentally within impact assessment is also a challenge. For example, stating that a product performs well in a specific life cycle stage or one impact category type while overlooking others.
Right.
Just to expand this further, when, as I mentioned before, we take into account of ISO 14067 to model carbon footprint, we always give a caution. Don't conclude with this, because here we talked about only carbon footprint. GHG emissions for, let's say, 20 years, 100 years, or 500 years with IPCC. That's it. We have not really looked upon water footprint, eutrophication, acidification, human toxicity, not at all. So please don't take this alone as the platform or ground to talk about your entire product in terms of other impacts. You see what I mean? Again, if you have done for cradle to gate, don't conclude for the entire life cycle, because you have done only for cradle to gate. You have not spanned across the gate. So you have to really stop your clients only within the scope what you have done. Similarly, within the interpretation, learnings or recommendation from LCA have to be fully included for realizing the improvements to the greater scale. So these are all the main challenges I can see in terms of the models, in terms of data, in terms of the disclosure. And it goes without saying. So like there's the other side of the coin, which is that suppliers or getting the data from the supply chain. So that is another challenge, but there are ways to deal with that. Okay, so let's talk about that later. So this is the main challenge, to my experience, that we are facing when conducting an LCA.
Yeah, that's so true. You need the full holistic picture of it, and not just looking at some pinpoints that you want to understand, but getting the full picture of it. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And so what have you found are some of the pitfalls, or I guess, speaking on these challenges, the areas of improvements within the methodologies to make the assessment more robust?
Wonderful question. I kind of answered this already as a reply to your previous question, if I remember right, or LCA standardized, or there some variations or variances between them. Anyway, like I said, uncertainties in results and data unavailability are the main drawbacks. Engaging stakeholders throughout conducting LCA can reduce the uncertainties related to data and assumptions that vary the LCA results. Just to give you a very clear example, let's say for natural fibers or synthetic fibers, the fiber level data, we always find that, this is quite far reachable for me. So maybe I just take a secondary data, or I take something like, some sort of assumptions. Here comes the issue. Just to be very, very clear with you, fiber level data, again, depends on the scope. It's really, really important. Just to mention, I have done all the fibers, you can name any fiber on earth. I would have done for primary data, like, different kinds of cotton. I've been to a lot of farms collecting the real data, and we have done studies. So this is how it should be, like, again, as I mentioned before, engaging regularly with stakeholders. This is really, really very important. Engaging stakeholders throughout the LCA, as well as engage them regularly to solicit feedback on selection of function units, boundaries, base case assumptions that can best represent the existing operations. So that really helps alleviate this, and using multiple function units and system boundaries to present results to a range of stakeholders. So generally, we always talk about one function unit. Don't stop there. You can go for multiple function units. I have done 3 function units for the same study. Because function unit is something like a base, right? So you can change the base, maybe in terms of instead of this, go for X, go for Y, and see how does it change with the results. So, and then similarly creating scenarios or run sensitivity study, as I told you before, in case of data scarcity, that all really helps a lot. Again, compare results to other studies in literature. I don't know people are doing it or not, but it has to be done. I always do that. Benchmark or compare the results to other studies, similar studies in literature. Again, I'm saying, don't conclude that when I say similar studies, don't haphazardly pull out anything. With the similar system boundaries and assumptions of your study, and go back to the stakeholders for discussion and conduct iterative LCAs to derive holistic decisions. I'm not sure whether the industry has really developed to that level of having multiple function units or iterative LCAs, because I have been doing it, but I cannot see, from a lot of other practitioners. So I just want to say collectively that, if industry has to transform, these are all the requirements that one has to look at very carefully. So by engaging with stakeholders throughout the LCA study, the existing LCA models with all the pitfalls, whatever I mentioned, can be improved. And very importantly, the model inaccuracies can be identified in iterative model runs. So this is the need of the art, to my knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially what you're saying is that we have to be, when doing an LCA, have to be as thorough as possible to verify all of our assumptions that we make through uncertainties and scenarios, and see how those assumptions change our results if those assumptions are changing. And for anyone, of our audience here, whether you're looking to do an LCA or whether you're a brand looking to get an LCA done for your products, definitely make sure that these LCAs are done correctly and thoroughly, and you can see these variances. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I guess we have kind of spoken about this, but how are these pitfalls, being addressed right now? So through uncertainty, and how do you think they're going to be addressed in the future?
Okay. As I already mentioned, LCA results mainly depend on the kind of data used and the judgments of the analyst or the practitioner at every stage of the analysis. So, as I said again, as I said before, I repeat it again, well-documented inventory analysis covering the assumptions made, inclusion of relevant impact analysis, use of sensitivity studies to test the influence of relevant assumptions are some of the ways we currently address the above mentioned challenges. So as I said, multiple function units, iterative LCS, etc. So these are all something I have been doing. Going forward, I would certainly recommend conducting, again, iterative LCS to comprehend if the learning from the LCA studies have been included in the operations and has helped in mitigating the impacts. That's really very important. It also helps in reducing data-related uncertainties. Anita, you understand what I'm talking about. Data-related uncertainty is the biggest issue. So that can be addressed. Really? I would also recommend more, like exonate LCA, that is LCA at the early design stage itself to avoid unintended consequences when scaled up. So that's why these studies are called as eco-design studies. Right. I also believe stakeholders will be ready to share more reliable and accurate data that would enable analysts or practitioners like us derive meaningful results. Traditionally, LCA has been applied retrospectively. In future, I would expect conducting more consequential LCS at a larger decision context. When I mean consequential LCS, for example, traditional LCA of renewable energy technology would look into its only production. However, a consequential LCA, there will be more emphasis on the impact of the offset of energy that would have been alternatively produced. You see what I mean? So this is the way we can address this in the future. So there are a lot of anomalies existing today. So these are the possible ways one can really look at in terms of addressing all this. So I would really dream that the forthcoming LCAs from the industry would certainly take into account of all this. And as one of the very passionate individuals in the space, I am really keen and keeping my fingers crossed to see the space which has been transformed with all these improvement points.
Yes, definitely. And it sounds already from when you had first done your PhD to where the LCA space is right now, that it has already improved so much, which is wonderful to see. And even within my time in LCA in these years, I have seen, especially from the supplier side, suppliers being more and more open to share their data, and also a lot of suppliers being very proactive on quantifying this data and then wanting to understand the impacts of it, which is hopefully on a good track for the future.
100%, Anita. I completely second you. It's worth mentioning actually. See, generally people think that all these studies on LCAs or environmental impact quantifications, they're all generally driven by brands or retailers. I must record this. I would say from my own experience, again, my experience can be exceptional, that can't be generalized. But what I'm saying is, with an experience of over a decade in the same space of LCA, I must say, I do have a lot of requests from the manufacturers themselves. And they are not driven by any brands or retailers to go for it. With their own interest, with their self-interest and with their own ambitions and dreams. There a lot of manufacturers have come back to me. They have reached out to me to perform a LCA. Like I must say that for some manufacturers I have done even cradle to grave. So we stopped at cradle to gate eventually, right, for a manufacturer. But some manufacturers said, Dr. Muthu, we want to understand how our consumers will treat our product. Or are there any recommendations we can do that? We can inform. Like they want to have a well-informed consumption pattern. So they said that is there anything you can derive from the LCA studies which we can advise our customers? See, you touched upon the right part. Today, the manufacturers, the link of manufacturing has really grown, and they are really very open to disclose the data, and they themselves are very willing to have these studies in place because it's really of great benefit to them, and this is where the impacts are happening. So we are talking about impact of impacts assessment. So this is where the impact is happening. So this really makes a lot of this really means a lot to them when they have all these studies, and very importantly, not only studies. Again, I just want to tell you, a lot of studies I see, they just come and talk about a function unit and just a result. To me, this is not an outcome of a LCA study at all. So to me, if you have concluded the studies, it is not the end of the study. To me, it's just a beginning.
Right.
The real travel or the real crux of the study lies in finding out the hotspots, how to reduce the impacts, what you have really quantified. And today, I'm very sorry to say that I see many studies talking about, okay, this is the study. Again, there are a lot of loopholes in the function unit, in the reference flow, in scope, etc., etc. Again, I'm not blaming. I'm just telling, I know as a passionate individual, how the study should be. So, I can only see that they were just stopped at the quantification level. Afterwards, you see just a conclusion of a few words. Then when you look for, I just want to tell you, no, this is really not, this is not the intention of LCA. LCAs are intended to have the recommendations, rather process contribution analysis or hotspots to find out where are the issues in the system, how we can make use of this study to alleviate the impacts, to make the betterment in terms of the processes, in terms of inputs like resources, life cycle stages, in all the aspects, to make the product better and better. So this is where the LCAs are standing in terms of the objectives.
That's true. And I think this kind of goes to a lot of people that think, okay, well, I will only do an LCA if I have what I think might be a more sustainable product, more eco-friendly product. But actually, it's also the other way around, just doing an LCA to find out the hotspots in your production, in your product, find out, okay, what should I actually be working on here? And then do one again later to see how that has minimized. Definitely.
Absolutely. Right.
All right. Fantastic. Okay, so I think that is it from my side for all of the questions I wanted to ask. Unless, Dr. Muthu, do you have any other words before we look at our audience and see if anyone would like to have some questions answered?
No, just a remark that I'm so happy with your very short questions. They were really interesting to answer. I hope I did answer to fulfill your requirements and also to the listeners. I'm really looking forward again to have a transformation in the industry. I just feel personally that if at all the industry has to be transformed, industry needs 2 T's. Traceability and transparency. This again comes, which is embedded into the data, again, in terms of scientific consensus. You can do a washing with green methods, but don't do greenwashing.
That's great words to live by.
Yeah, as sustainability practitioners, we want everything to be green, but not in terms of washing. Okay, you can do a green wash at home, don't wash frequently. So you maintain green methods to wash. Maybe instead of machine dry, go for line dry. But please, for heaven's sake, do not let the industry die by greenwashing. Okay, we are all here to support you anytime. So please reach out to any experts like us or any practitioners like us. We are here to help you out. with whatever you require in terms of positioning your product in the market in terms of its sustainability metrics. But the only way to do that is with a robust and scientifically done LCA study. Okay, so this is the remark I want to give you. And now let's go to the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Mutu, for that. Okay. All right. So let's see what questions we've had. All right, I see we have a lot of questions come in. Okay, so let's see within the next 15 minutes how many we can answer. For all of the rest that we don't get to, we will, we can reply to these via email. All right, so I guess the first one that we got was, are LCAs being conducted on digital products and services? For example, virtual fashion shows and social media posts, emails, etc.?
Wow, very interesting question. To my knowledge, yes. In fact, I have done few LCA studies for some events. For example, like a community chess walk, for example, and also we have also my team has done a few studies on some shows like annual dinner, similar to fashion shows, and I am aware of few studies which were done on emails and social media posts. So what is the carbon footprint of shooting an email? So there were studies done on that. When I say done on, I was either part of this study by doing the study, or I would have been part of reviewing the study in any of the modes, like maybe as a critical review panel member, or I would have reviewed, because I'm one of the reviewers with many journals. So a lot of LCA studies I review every week. So by this, I would have come across many studies on all these digital products and services. Just to answer this is not new. This has been done in the sector.
Perfect. All right. Wonderful. Then the next question is, what advice would you give to all small and independent brands that make sustainable claims but don't have the resources like people, knowledge, money, etc. to perform an LCA? So what advice would you give to these brands?
Okay, so in this question, what sought my attention is sustainable claims. I don't know what does it mean, because there is no climb which is called sustainable climb. So maybe I think they're talking about green climbs, if I understand right.
Yeah, I guess green claims. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, green or sustainable climbs. But again, this is all fine. But what I want to tell you is that a climb can be sustainable or green, depends on whether it is substantiated or not. If not, it will be greenwashing. So to answer this question, I understood that you said that they are small and independent brands, right?
Right.
So, yes. Okay. So they also said that they don't have, people, knowledge and resources. So the best thing is that they can reach out to people like us, and we are here to help them. But in case if they have any other difficulties in terms of resources, etc., that we can discuss further. Maybe with the scope, we don't want to go for a very elaborative study on cradle to grave, etc. So again, depends on the circumstances. So why do they need this study? If they really want to have a internal reference, so we can just do a very simple secondary data-based study. So that's not really going to be very expensive. So we can just do it, which can meet the requirements. So with that, they would be able to get some sort of grip or an idea of where their products are standing in terms of the environmental impacts per se. And with that, they'll be able to, gain their popularity or familiarity around the market. And then, they will certainly grow, and then they can go for a full-scale LCA.
Definitely. And yeah, wonderful answer. I hope this has answered your question to our audience member. And fantastic answer. You can start small before you go into a full-scale LCA. This actually goes into another question that I just saw that might tie into this, which are, what are your thoughts on crowdsourced raw material data platform like the HIG or the upcoming Google and WWF partnership? So maybe that could also be for the last question as well.
Can you please repeat this question, Anita? I think
Yes.
I didn't hear that.
Yes, of course. So the question is, what are your thoughts on crowdsourced raw material data platforms like the HIG or the upcoming Google and WWF partnership?
Okay, so HIG, again, I think they are mentioning about HIG. HIG has many modules, like facility environment module, facility social module, of course, brand and retailer module, and they do have a product module, but that has a few subsets. One is MSI, which is for the material sustainability index. Another one is for the cradle to gate and cradle to grave models. And I've been working with SAC for quite some time on this as well. So I think they are talking about this. This has its own merits and demerits, as well as its own scope and boundaries. So again, I'm saying, before you apply anything like this, you have to see the context and your applicability and the intended audiences, or the intended what do you call that, benefits of the study. So based on that, you can go for it. If it is really going to be of just your knowledge and just going to serve as a reference, so then probably you can go for it. But as I told you before, if your purpose is going to be something different, then it is really worthwhile to go further with full-time studies, full-scale studies, what we are talking about today.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Then I guess this question here might be great as an overall question. Maybe a lot of people have this on their mind, which is, on average, how long does it take to conduct an LCA? Perhaps, and someone here says, perhaps for one cotton t-shirt as an example. So how long would an LCA take?
Wow, very good question. I'm sure everyone has this question in their minds too. So this again really depends on many factors. I can just tell you, the scale is going to be like this. I have done some studies within a week. I have done some studies for 1 year. So that really depends on the scale. Like when we have done for multiple materials and then complex situations with many scenarios, many aspects into it, so the study is really very extensive. But if you take a very simple product, again, if you want secondary data or go with primary data, that really depends. And again, in terms of secondary data, this is really going to be very quick. It depends on the consultant or the practitioner who does and what sort of expertise he has. So generally for me, it will not take more than a couple of days. Generally, I do it very quickly with review, models, some set of data, and then within typically, less than a week, I used to conduct a LCA with secondary data. If it is going to be a primary data, again, that really depends on your supply chain and the scope, what you want to include. And again, if it is going to be cradle to gate within your boundary where you have your own influence, then this is another story. But if you want us to include cradle to grave, that includes consumer use and disposal. Here comes, are we going with industrial consensus or calculations for the functional limits, or like I have done a lot of studies with administering surveys with the consumers, actual consumers. So we have really got the data from the consumers. So this also can be done. That again depends on the time. So I would say that I cannot give the exact time. This is all really depends on, all these aspects, what I said, secondary data, scope of cradle to gate or cradle to grave, and then public disclosure you want, or you want for internal reference. So, I don't want to mention anything because the range is going to be really quite wide, depending on different factors, what I mentioned.
Fantastic. Great answer. I hope this answered your question to our audience member. All right. Okay, then we have one interesting question here that says, how can we assess or validate the data provided in an LCA? Because every product manufacturer does their own LCA, and it often is tailored to their needs and wants, and in the end works as their marketing tool. So this is actually something that we've spoken about a little bit here, but maybe we can address this again.
Right. So you are 100% right. The data eventually comes from a manufacturer in his or her own boundary. So it's all factory specific data, geographic location specific data. Again, there are a lot of specific aspects into it. So this is why I said you can't pull up the data from X study and you can use it. You can't do that. You already answered it. You have nailed it rather. So what I want to tell you is how we validate. So as a practitioner, I generally go to sites. On site, I validate all the information on energy, water.
Mm-hmm.
We go to a site round to look into what all the scopes, boundaries, how do they store chemicals, from where they purchase chemicals, from where energy is coming, what sort of energy mix they have, do they burn their own energy, like on-site energy generation, from where, what is the source of water, how much plastics they have, what do they do with the plastics, or they really recycle, or they are just landfill, and then how do they store chemicals, how do they dispose chemicals, and how do they discharge wastewater, how do they track wastewater. So the list goes on. So we check every single number. Typically LCA has numerous digits, numerous numbers. It's a mathematical model. So I always feel that I have the responsibility, like me, all the LCA practitioners, they have their responsibilities of whatever numbers get into the reports of each LCA study, which is done by a particular practitioner. So I believe that it is my responsibility to check each and every number before it is entered into the model, as well as which is entered into the reports and analyzed. So we check all the data with many aspects. So I think practitioners have their own styles. So my style is different. So I do it with on-site. If not, so I do it with off-site, with different other mechanisms of verifying each data and validating the data. So verification and validating, both are crucial. As I told you before, that will address the data uncertainties, ambiguities, and different other aspects pertaining to issues, or rather challenge. Anita has a very good question. So I already answered about this. And very importantly, this also answers, this is the reason I'm telling you that you can't take or pull out carbon footprint of 1 kilogram of organic cotton from X study to yours. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of factors which would be different from your study and the other study.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right, so we only have 2 more minutes, so maybe we have 2 little questions that maybe we can just touch upon before closing here. All right, so the first one is, what is a good LCA tool which can be integrated into undergraduate coursework? So this is for our students here that are interested in becoming LCA practitioners. Do you recommend a software that can be used for undergrads?
Okay, so I'm so happy. This sounds like one of my students, because I do teach in a lot of universities, and I do have a lot of readers who read my books, and I do have a lot of student friends who sends out a lot of questions. Again, I take this opportunity to thank all of them for the interest. Okay, to answer your question, there are a lot of softwares out there: SimaPro, Gobi, OpenLCA, and so on. So all these are quite okay. So depends on which one is of interest to you. So I don't want to say this is best or that is best, because all these software manufacturers are well known to me. Always they will not be happy if I say X is best or Y is best. So I would just say that there are a lot of softwares like SimaPro, Gobi. They are very credible softwares, and also OpenLCA. This is open, so you can just download it for free and you can use it. If you are a student, so this cannot be used for industrial context. So you can use any one of these databases. Mm-hmm. You might be able to Google a lot of my books. They talk about handbook of they talk about LCA studies in textiles on different other products. So I'm sure this all will help you to understand and comprehend LCA models, science, and then the methodology itself. So you need to really have a sound knowledge. You need to gain all this in terms of sound knowledge and robust skill sets towards all this. Then only you can be a good LCA practitioner. And I take this opportunity to wish all the very best to all the students who are all going to be the future LCA practitioners who are going to join us.
Yes, wonderful. Looking forward to it. The more LCA practitioners, the better to get that information out there. Absolutely. All right. Okay. So unfortunately, I don't want to keep everyone. I know we are already at time. So with that, we will wrap up here. We'll try to get to all of the unanswered questions via email. Do get in contact with us if you have any more questions or anything like that. And, feel free to contact GreenStory. We will direct all of our questions to Dr. Muthu as well. And yes, it was wonderful having everyone here. And just to sign off, give me one moment. I do want to quickly touch upon as well our next webinars that GreenStory is holding. So we have one webinar tomorrow and one after that. So if you are interested in this topic, want to find out more about this, then please join us within the next 2 days. And yes, on my behalf, I would like to thank Dr. Mutu so much for being here. It was so wonderful getting all of this information. Great for anyone, whether it be students, as we saw, current LCA practitioners, as well as manufacturers, brands, to get this knowledge, to apply, and to strive together to make a better impact, to make actual claims about sustainability. So wonderful on my side to have you here, Dr. Mutu.
Thank you so much. Pleasure is all mine. So wonderful to have a great chat, rather fireside chat with you, Anita. And the questions are really, really very nice and very interesting. And I'm so happy to be here and to answer your questions as well as the questions from the audience, which are also really great. Very, very interesting questions indeed. So thank you so much for everyone. Who have attended our webinar today. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the entire GreenStory team, Akhil, Anita, Marshall, for your great, wonderful arrangements and considering me to be one of the first, to be the first speaker for this great webinar series. Thank you once again, and thank you, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.